There's one thing that haunts a detective long after the case file goes cold. It's the silence left behind when there should have been voices, children's voices, chewing gum and singing off-key and arguing over who stole whose seat, all swallowed by a sky that suddenly forgot to move. The last bus out of Dry Creek. Wyoming vanished in a snowfall that wasn't supposed to stick. And if that sounds like the beginning of a tall tale, it isn't. The tall part came later. This was the case that cut out the part of me that believed the world was ordinary, that roads keep their promises and houses stay where they're built, and that a child's handprint means nothing, but a child was there. My name is Evan Ruiz, private investigator, former deputy. I always told myself I'd take a case where I'd be the good guy again, just once more, to rinse the taste of insurance fraud off my teeth and the stink of infidelity out of my clothes. When Nora Pike called, her breath was wet with panic and static. And when she said my son, I didn't let her finish the sentence before I said yes. Her boy's name was Liam Pike, 12 braces, a gap he was proud of, because he swore it made him whistle when he wasn't trying. And he'd been one of 16 kids who got on bus 27 on a Wednesday that was supposed to be a light dusting day. They said the weather turned as the bus pulled off from the gravel lot behind the elementary school, like a fist closing around a candle. They said the driver, Harriet Sloan, 49, hair braided tight, hands steadier than God, was heard on the radio once, then not again. They said it was only 22 minutes to the first drop on the S-curve past Coyote Ridge. But somehow Harriet drove 57 before the engine coughed, and silence settled in the interior like insulation. But that's not the detail that kept me awake. That's just the math. The detail was this. Someone found the bus later, when the storm pretended to be over, found it parked neat as a prayer in a ranching track 30 miles from the last known position. Tires clean of mud, as if lifted and set. One folding door cracked open, a fringe of ice crystal filigree around the rubber lip, and a handprint smudged on the back window in something too dark to be paint, with 4 long fingers, no thumb, hash lines like the ridges of a burned field. I've seen hands injured, missing digits, mangled in balers, or split by fireworks. This wasn't that. This was anatomy starting from a rule book I never got to read. I arrived as the first responders rolled out with that stiff, wired exhaustion that says we found less than we hoped and more than we can carry. The bus interior was warm and wrong, like a mouth that had been closed too long. A line of abandoned backpacks sat like a parade of small animals that had decided to play dead and forgot how to breathe again. The emergency exit at the back was sealed from inside, the safety latch engaged. The heater fan was off, but the air had that after-heat humidity that means bodies were breathing here not long ago. I went through the rote motions because ritual keeps your heart from breaking in public. I photographed gum wrappers, measured scuff arcs, torn braid ribbon that smelled faintly of petrochemical and something sweet, like scorched carnival sugar. I pressed my palm to the vinyl seat, where a small imprint had indented the cushion, and felt warmth climbing back into the material under my skin. No, not warmth, pressure, the ghost of weight. When I took my hand away, I could hear my voice saying hello to no one. The sheriff, Lyle Quad, chin like a cinder block, tolerated me because Nora had dragged the school board through 3 town halls and said she'd bring cameras if they didn't let her hire outside help. Lyle showed me the route map, as if maps could hold onto anything once snow decided the edges. He didn't mention the house, not at first. We only learned about the house because a lineman named Fletcher Rook had to check a downed wire near County 9 and followed the crackle of arcing past a stand of cottonwoods into a part of Dry Creek that didn't appear on any current plat. He saw the bus from the road, but beyond that, further in, up a rutted lane, he saw a roofline. It wasn't a rancher's haul-out shed or some busted barn. It was a tall, thin house like a match struck and forgotten. Its paint oxidized into a yellow-gray sheen that reminded me of old fat cooled in a pan. No one believed the house until they were standing in the yard looking at their own boot prints and trying to reconcile why the house looked like it was both far away and right there, as if the air had doubled back on itself. They didn't tell the parents about the house, but Nora had a mouth like a trapdoor, and she was faster than their discretion. She grabbed my sleeve with both hands and said, "If there's a door up there, you will walk through it for him." I said yes, because there are times in this work when you are not a man, but a promise. Inside the bus, I found something that didn't belong in school day America. A folded sheet of butcher paper, the kind used under craft paint and cheap pizzas. On it, a drawing. A long-limbed figure with a head like an eggshell pressed upon. 2 eyes too round and too dark. A mouth that was a seam. 4 fingers, lines instead of whorls, and around the figure, a house taller than the horizon, windows like stitches, a roofline hooked like a finger. Underneath, in a looping hand that could be any child's, and also one in particular, "If we leave him a piece, he will hear." I thought of the ribbon, the sweet burn scent. I thought of the door up the lane. I thought of the way a bus can be lifted without leaving tracks if you refuse to think too hard about who is doing the lifting. And then I did the first reckless thing of that day. I walked toward the house. The air changed before the fence line. There's a way summer storms make the air taste like pennies. This was not that. This was like biting into paper, and finding it chewed itself back, the snow around my boots compacted with the hush of packed sugar, though by then it should have been crusted. The nearer I came, the more my breath sounded like it had to push through someone else's breathing to get out. The front door was painted a black so thick it reflected dull as oil. And as I lifted my hand to knock it opened inward soundlessly, the same way a mouth opens when a yawn arrives without asking. I don't pray, but I thought about the shape of a prayer. I touched the threshold with 2 fingers, like checking the temperature of a bath. Warm, the warmth of something recently swallowed, and behind that, the smell, sweetness layered over rot. A carnival left out in August until the apples ferment and the bees learn your name. I stepped inside, and every floorboard had a memory of screaming. Some say a house is only wood and bone, and whatever you move into it. But when the light is wrong, and the corridors surprise you by being longer on the inside than the outside can hold, a house is also a throat. There in the front room, shadows scrolled slow, and what I thought was a horde of broken furniture resolved into a mound of something wetly busy. Carcasses layered in a slump, deer and rabbit, and unnameable farmyard tragedies, alive with the pale writhe of things that consume and become, suspended above, an altar contrived from twine and root and hair, twisted into angles that made my eye pick a fight with my brain. A droplet of black fell from the altar and struck the carcass mound with a noise, like a fingernail tapping a glass of syrup. I told myself to leave. I told myself the thing that eats you the fastest is a brave face. Then a sound came from upstairs, a long exhale a man might make when he stands up full after a full meal, and pretends he wasn't waiting to show you how full he is. The staircase slumped. Pine turned to paper, but I climbed anyway because sometimes a promise walks your legs for you. At the landing, a corridor extended and extended, doors on either side impersonating opportunities. At the end, a door deeper black than the door at the front, its knob old brass the color of dried sun. I reached for it because my hand could not tolerate doing anything else. Behind me, something creaked, not a floorboard, a chair. When I turned, there was a man who wasn't, and his 4 long fingers came up, and he pressed them to the seam in his face and unraveled a whisper. S-H-H-H-H. The door's black made light give up. I turned the knob, and the air changed to a weight. It pressed into my chest with the steady insistence of someone who'd learned the rhythm of my breath and decided they could do it better. The room was almost empty, and that made it worse, except in the center where a pool had gathered, wide and dark and alive, as if it had opinions. Blood doesn't rise, but this did. It seeped between the floorboards from below, not dripping down from the ceiling, but birthing itself up through seams like a mouth, turning inside out. I stepped where the boards were gray and dry, and told myself names of the children, so I wouldn't forget what this was for. Liam, Rose, Theo with the stutter when he got excited, Sophia who wore a hat with a fox face and didn't take it off indoors. Names are ropes you throw behind you and hope they catch. In the corner opposite the door, where normal rooms concede to geometry, there was not a corner. It was deeper than shadow, a black that made the black door behind me feel like a pastel. I squinted and told myself I saw movement because I needed to. The rocking chair creaked again, not like an old person moving, like the chair didn't need a person at all. That tall figure lifted his hand and placed it gentle as a mother at his mouth seem again. But this time, the gesture was not a hush. It was instruction. His other hand unfurled and extended toward the knot corner. And if he had a face under the seam, it had decided grins were a good idea. The grin wasn't in the mouth. It was in the eyes. Eyes so round they seemed relieved not to blink. Children came out of the dark. The dark did not recede to let them pass so much as it peeled off them like a second shirt. The first was Theo, his cowlick still a small riot at his crown, his eyes glossy like he'd been staring at an eclipse and forgot to stop. Then Rose, with the strawberry birthmark on her chin that she bragged looked like a map of Texas if you squinted, then 3 more, then 6, then all but not all. They moved like sleepwalkers who'd make breakfast if you gave them a pan. Kids, I said. It came out a croak. And then I remembered you're not supposed to startle sleepwalkers. Or maybe that's a myth. Maybe I made that up right there because it felt like a plan. They gathered at me as if the room had 90-degree tilt and I was the lowest place. I didn't look back at the chair because looking back would glue my feet to the floor. I heard it, a hand at each shoulder I could reach, murmuring, keep breathing, keep breathing, keep breathing, to a circular chorus I hoped their ears could find. At the threshold, the weight in the air lightened by the gram, like someone loosening a fist 1 finger at a time. When the last of the children who were there had crossed, the murk gave a small, disappointed sound, the way an empty can make a click when it realizes you're done with it. I glanced back, despite the warning my spine screamed. The chair rocked gently, as if relieved of a duty it hadn't taken seriously. The black knot corner watched us go the way deep water watches a stone, down the hall, down the stairs that tried to sigh us into splinters, past the front room where the mound was and wasn't, because now the air only smelled like old paper and cool syrup, the wet, busy sound gone, as if it had been a soundtrack the house could switch off. Outside, the world was ruinously bright, snow throwing back sunlight hard enough to squint the soul. For a few breaths, nobody saw us. The yard held the same tired wind and the same brittle fence, as if we were walking out of a photograph that had not been changed by our entry. Then a paramedic spotted the line of small heads behind me, and her voice arrived before she did. Hey, we got them. We didn't got them, not exactly. Liam was not there. 2 others were missing. Ava, who'd colored her shoelaces with permanent marker because purple made her run faster. And Cole, who told his teacher a riddle about horses and then explained it 4 times because he liked the explaining more than the answer. Parents came because they always do, even when they're told not to. They come like tides that forgot the moon. Nora's face split in relief and broke in the same second when she realized the count was wrong, and I felt something in me crack on a hinge I didn't know I had. The sheriff took statements like counting beads on a breakable string. The children, most of them, knew nothing after the bus ride. A few remembered the shape of a storm, like a hallway closing. One remembered a smell, like burned candy. Another the feel of a seatbelt she hadn't been wearing. Memory is a body's last defense. It hides the thing that would eat the rest. The bus interior was rechecked, the back window swabbed. The forefinger smear produced no prints, because the lines in it were not friction ridges. They were straight, like cross-hatched cuts. They were lines meant to score rather than grip. I told the sheriff there was a house. This time, he nodded like he'd decide later whether to agree. We walked back up the track together with two deputies who pretended their hands weren't shaking because the cups of coffee they held gave them a reason. The house sat where it had, politely waiting. I did not want to go inside again, but want is a luxury that doesn't attend work like this. The entryway had shed its rot perfume. The floorboards were only wood. The chandelier had forgot it was an altar and had become a chandelier again, dusty, benign, ordinary. Upstairs, the black room was a master bedroom with a water stain and a carpet seam. No pool, no chair, no knot corner. I swallowed hard, and my throat made a small sound, a private apology to my own certainty. The sheriff said, "Stress does things," and I let him have his way with those words, because I needed him to keep the search grid moving. We kept moving until the light failed us. That night, back at my rental off Main, I took out the folded butcher paper and laid it on the table. The drawing's edges were torn, not clean. The figure's legs were too long, bent in ways that didn't respect hinge rules. Around the figure, kids had doodled stars and what might have been falling snow, except the snow was drawn with arrows pointing down and arrows pointing up, as if it had a plan. In the corner of the paper was a triangle no, a roof over a box that looked like a mailbox. Under it, 2 words, for him. The next morning, I went to the row of wind-carved mailboxes that dotted County 9 like broken teeth. Neither the post office nor the county maps showed a house at that lane. But there was a battered green box, lettered in peeling white. 19. The numbers switched around as if they'd jumped when the wind hit. When I opened it, something brushed my knuckles. Inside lay a black envelope, cheap paper that left a soot smear on my finger. The stamp was half canceled by a wandering franking wheel. The handwriting on the front was large and loopy, the kind of cursive that comes from practicing a grown-up's name before you're allowed to drive. I should have called it in. I should have bagged it and delivered it like a sacrament. But certain truths eat their way out of you if you don't give them teeth. I broke the seal and unfolded a letter with lines too straight for a child's hand and words too simple for an adult's. Dear Mister, we want it to stop. We want her to stop lying. We will give you 2 to make it right. Please take us when it's done. Please make them forget. Please leave the rest so they don't know. 2. We had 3 missing. The math snagged on a burr. I read the letter twice, then 3 times, listening to the storm that wasn't happening anymore, to the quiet that wasn't quiet. Outside, somewhere beyond the cut bank, a shape moved that wasn't wind. I told myself it was a deer. I told myself not to lie to myself. I drove to Nora's house with the letter sitting in a plastic sleeve I'd bought in a burst of belated professionalism. Her living room was a winter of quilts and a summer of photographs of Liam at different sizes, all of him with the same eyes. On the coffee table lay a stack of drawings ripped from larger sheets. Houses with wrong windows, stick figures with 4 fingers, a bus that had been colored in so hard the crayon wax shone like glaze. I asked where she got them, and her mouth thinned. Merritt O'Neill's mother dropped them, she said. Merritt, 11, friend adjacent to Liam, the kind of kid who is always there in the background of class photos. Never center, never edge, always halfway between. Merritt draws a lot, Nora said. And that's when I realized the edges of the drawings on her table were cut clean. Every depiction of the tall figure had been removed, replaced by smooth, blank shape. I thought about the torn butcher paper from the bus. I thought about puzzle edges. And then I did the second reckless thing of that case. I asked to look in Liam's room. In the back of his closet, under a bag of Lego and a folded fort blanket that smelled like the last day of summer, I found large sheets with missing holes, lines where the tall figure would have been, ripped out by someone with small, angry hands. On the carpet, there were confetti bits of black crayon wax ground into the pile. I sat back on my heels, and my knees cracked like old twigs somewhere in the house. A kettle began to boil and scream, as if it had finally discovered what screaming was for. The letter took up residence in my pocket and never paid rent. I turned it over to the sheriff, the way a man gives another man a loaded gun, reverent, reluctant, hoping he knew how to hold it. He read it once and said nothing. He read it twice and said, "We're not showing the press," which was the first smart thing he'd said since I arrived. Then he scrubbed a hand through his beard and said the thing I'd been telling myself was hysteria. What if the number isn't 2 anymore? There are rules in stories about bargains. We teach them to children disguised as bedtime. Don't take food from strangers. Don't invite people in. Don't promise what you can't afford. But nobody tells you how to keep children from trying to fix their own pain with someone else's ruin. Merritt O'Neill's mother let me sit on the edge of a bed that smelled like fruit shampoo and pencil shavings, and look through a drawer where a child had hidden evidence of magic, the way you hide your baby teeth, scraps of glossy magazine, twine, a lock of pale hair taped to an index card, 3 black envelopes with no stamps, only drawings of little houses where the stamp should go. Merritt draws with Cindy a lot, her mother said, then corrected herself. Drew. Cindy had not been among the returned. The correction hung in the air like a lamp someone forgot to turn off. I asked gently about lies at school, and she winced. Yes, there had been talk, and talk about talk, and a bathroom where crying echoed too loud because the tile liked to brag. A boy had said a girl wasn't a girl yet, and everyone laughed, and then regretted it, but too late. Grown-ups think they own cruelty because they have mortgages. Children are artists. The letters told a story in pieces. Early ones were wishes without edges. Make her stop. Make a scene. Make a place that doesn't hurt. Later ones learned numbers. 2 offered, but an envelope with a smear of soot on its lip suggested a second draft. The smear matched my finger after I touched the envelope at 19. This letter said 3. The 3 names spelled in a hand that didn't want to. The names spaced as if distance would help. The last name was Liam. When you do this work, there's a day when you stop pretending everything is a metaphor. I drove back to the lane where the house stood when it felt like it, and the house was not there. There was wind and a coil of barbed wire and a magpie who had learned English curses from a rancher and practiced them for an hour and got bored. I sat in my car and stared at a space until my brain offered me a house, and then took it away over and over like a sleight of hand with no hand. When the sun dropped enough to turn the cutbank to bruise, I saw it, sudden as a trick of the eye that refuses to admit it's a trick. I didn't wait. My boots made the sugar hush again, and the air grew that false warmth again, and the door, polite as a host, opened again. I brought with me a roll of twine and a chalk marker, and a pocket full of coins, and every superstition I'd accidentally learned from old women who said the rosary and old men who spooled wire in snowstorms. On the threshold, I drew a line and tied a coin in a knot and put it in the jam because bargains like numbers and waste their time counting. The house noticed and didn't. Inside, the front room was not a slaughterhouse now. It was a parlor, and that made my skin try to separate from me. A piano sat like a quiet animal under a lace runner, and on the keys lay a comb with teeth too long, as if they'd grown to match a different hair. I moved through the rooms until the house offered me stairs. They slumped, but did not resist. At the top was the corridor that should not fit in the footprint I'd seen outside. The door at the end wore its black like a bruise again. Before I reached it, a door to my left breathed, and I looked in. It was a child's room, almost, a bed with a quilt covered in animals arranged wrong, a wooden horse with a face too thoughtful, a mobile of birds that hung without string. On the wall, drawings, the same 2 round eyes, the same 4-line hands, but this time not children's hands drawing them. These lines had weight, a practiced, patient repetition, as if the artist were learning how to be seen by looking at himself too long. My stomach turned a slow wheel. The black room waited. I opened it, and the weight came back, heavier, impatient. The pool returned, bubbling from below like a spring that had found its purpose. The knot corner glowed faintly, not with light, but with attention. "Liam," I said, and immediately hated myself for giving the room what it wanted. The rocking chair creaked from behind me, and before I could forbid myself, I looked. He sat like a fact, 4 fingers per hand, skin the color of fat that's cooled on a plate, eyes like holes cut in paper and glued onto something that didn't need eyes to see. The seam of a mouth puckered, then softened, then pulled into that grin that isn't a grin. He lifted his hand and made the SHHHH again, and I realized suddenly he didn't mean be quiet. He meant listen. From the knot corner, a voice, small, "I'm sorry," it said, and the room changed shape, and Liam Pike stepped out, face slack with the kind of relief that hurts, hair full of dust, 1 shoe missing. He looked at me, and then over my shoulder at the figure in the chair, and then down at the blood. "I didn't know I was a number," he said. A second shape moved behind him, but did not enter the room. It was shorter, maybe a girl. And when I reached a hand toward it, the room exhaled a long, purring no. I took Liam's hand, and it was warm with a warmth that didn't belong to the house. "We're leaving," I said, and my voice found its legs. The figure in the chair tilted its head, as if curious about my confidence. I backed us out, step by step. At the threshold, the weight pressed a palm into my chest, testing whether I would trade breath for bravery. I didn't. We slid out, down the corridor, down the stairs. The house let us, the way a cat lets you pick it up to see if you'll learn something. Outside, the world did its bright cruelty again. Liam flinched, then blinked, then began to cry like his face had to relearn the shapes of crying. He put both fists to his eyes and made small, hiccuping sounds. And then he said, "Merritt said he would only take 2, and then we would get a place." "What place?" I asked. But he shook his head, because children know how to keep doors locked, even when adults forget. When Nora saw Liam, something animal left her in a scream that bloomed into a laugh before it finished being a scream. She held him so hard I worried about ribs, and then remembered ribs heal, and the other things don't. The sheriff looked at me as if I had learned to speak a language he didn't know existed. He said, "The other 2," and I nodded because saying names in that moment would have made them offerings. That night, my dreams found me. I stood in the black room, and the pool breathed, and something small took my hand and said, "Will you be my number?" I woke with my fingers cramped around the edge of the mattress, as if a small hand had been prying them open. On the bedside table lay a coin I hadn't put there, tied with a piece of twine, in a knot I knew I had tied for the door. Bargains count. They count and count until someone tells them to stop. I went back to the mailbox in the morning, because if a house can move, a mailbox has to anchor it, or there's nothing left for letters to do. Inside lay another black envelope, no stamp, no name. Inside, a single line in that looping hand I'd begun to recognize. "We are sorry for the extra, but we don't want to go alone." I stood on the dirt road until my feet went numb from the kind of cold that only arrives when you realize warmth is finite. Then I made a choice that still tastes like pennies when I remember it. I wrote a letter. Dear Mister, it said, because names matter, and we hadn't earned one another's. Take me instead. I didn't write it as poetry. I wrote it as instruction. Bring the other two back and take me. If you must count, count once. If you must bargain, bargain high. I sealed the envelope with the spit of a man who knew what he was asking and hated himself for being willing. I tied a coin to the letter with twine because I'd learned the house likes to count and I wanted it busy. Then I slid it into 19 and shut the door and leaned my forehead against the cold metal until it told me a small story about foolishness. The house came faster that day. Across the field, the air rippled like heat where there was none, and the roof lines sketched itself in, and the front door didn't wait to pretend to be closed. It stood open the way a wound stands open when it has decided scabbing is for later. I walked in without my rituals, because ritual can become begging. And I had promised not to beg. The front room was music this time, a piano with keys depressed by no fingers, a hymn I didn't recognize arranged for empty. I said the names of the missing, and the house listened as if I were reading to it. Upstairs, the corridor was shorter, or I had learned how to walk it. The black room was itself, but stripped. No pool, only a dark Petri dish stain where it had been. No chair. The knot corner waited, patient as a gate. I spoke to it like an equal. You got my letter, I said. The air pressed a hand to my mouth, and I let it because I knew it had to. Then the air lifted and returned with smell, sweetness over something that had once been meat, and now remembered being meat only as an argument. A figure stepped out of the corner, and it was not the tall one. It was Ava, shoelaces dyed purple, cheeks wet with the salt that dries and returns. She looked around with the expression of someone stepping off a tilt-a-whirl and refusing to admit they are dizzy. You can come, I said, and my voice was a rope again. Behind her, Cole hovered as if his sneakers had opinions about thresholds. He had drawn a horse in black marker on the side of his shoe, and the horse seemed to consider me with more caution than the boy. Will you take me? I asked the room. It's an odd thing to ask a place, but the house was not just a place, and pretending it would be like pretending wolves are just dogs with interesting hobbies. The air rushed once like laughter from someone with a chest full of moths. The corridor behind me lengthened as if to show me what hallways are for. I took a step forward, and a weight settled on my shoulders like a shawl that remembered who it had belonged to. Don't, Ava said, small fears. He doesn't do trades, he does counts. She looked over my shoulder and flinched, the way people do when they spot something on the ceiling they don't want to name. He said we could have a place, and then we didn't want it when we got there, she said. It was all corners, Cole said, and it was loud but with quiet. Children do not worry about contradictions because they live inside them. The figure with 4 fingers didn't appear in the room. His presence arrived the way cold arrives in a cave. It is suddenly there where it wasn't. The seam mouth breathed that instructive hush, not to silence us, but to fold the space around the sound. I said, "I owe you a number," because the letter had been a promise, and if promises have skeletons, I wanted mine to stand. The air grew heavy in that way that makes you wish you'd paid more attention to your lungs. Behind me, footsteps on the corridor floor whispered the arithmetic of approach. I did not turn. Turning is polite. I had decided not to be polite. "You have 3 back," I said. 3 you didn't earn. 3 the house spit out because you were full of them. Bargains don't respond to insult. They don't have skin. But the air shivered with a displeasure that felt almost like interest. "Take me," I said again, and the word "me" did something in that room. It made a rip, visible and not. A hand touched the back of my neck. Not skin, not glove. A sensation like finding out the word you've been saying your whole life means something different to everyone else. SHH, the hush breathed at the base of my skull, and my knees nearly forgot their purpose. I said the only prayer I ever learned as a kid, the one with a rhythm like calming a horse, and I said it not to God, but to my own cowardice. And for a moment, I was a boy in a church basement where the lights buzzed and the coffee sang, and everything was ordinary. Ava took my hand. Cole took the other. "Let's go," Ava said to me, to the room, to the world. She is the kind of child who says to the world, "Let's go," and the world blinks first. We moved back, one step, then another. The house did not permit this. The house tolerated it. The corridor did not lengthen this time. The knot corner did not swell with wanting. When we reached the hallway proper, the door at the end opened not into the stairwell, but into a hallway of doors that all led to streets I recognized from a town that had been paved over. I picked the one that smelled like train oil and cut hay and pretended there were rules. At the bottom of a stair that had learned how to make its creak sound like a plea, the front room waited and tried to decide what to be a parlor, a slaughterhouse, a room where a piano practices breathing. I told it to be a door. It obliged. Outside, the snow held its light and its terrible, neutral generosity. We stepped into a world that had gone on without us and would continue, indifferent and miraculous. Nora ran. She picked Ava up and then realized she was not hers and put her down, and then picked her up again, because any child saved is yours for a second. Cole found his mother's hand by a homing instinct not listed in any textbook. The sheriff didn't count. He looked at me and didn't say thank you because he couldn't afford the word. I swayed because balance is an agreement between you and the ground. And I had been negotiating in a room that did not sign contracts. That night, the house did not come to me in my dreams. It came to my window, not as a structure, but as a sense, the way the air changes before a bird hits glass. A coin sat on the sill, twine knotted, the knot loosened. Under the coin, a black envelope. Inside, one sentence. "You still owe a number." I wanted to argue. I wanted to write a treatise on the morality of debt and the ethics of promises extracted under duress. But the house is not a philosophy graduate student, and the thing with 4 fingers is not a judge. They count. They count until someone smarter than me finds a way to make them stop. I burned the letter in the sink and watched the smoke curl into a shape that wasn't a shape. The smoke smelled like sugar burned too far, into a bitterness that nobody orders on purpose. A month later, when the thaw found the bones of winter where winter had been careless, they discovered Harriet Sloane, 28 miles from where the bus had been, tucked against a fence like she'd decided to rest. And then made a mistake. Exposure, they said, because they always say exposure when they cannot tolerate the alternative. The blood from the back window didn't match anyone. It matched a sample on a handkerchief from a boy who had vanished in 1974. The handkerchief folded so small it seemed to have been taught discretion. The lab report came with a note that said contamination cannot be ruled out. Science begs politely when its hands are tied. Liam returned to school. He sits sometimes and watches the corner of a room like he's waiting for it to try something. He is nicer than he was. That's a sentence adults say when a child becomes careful. Ava runs again in purple laces that have faded. Cole tells his horse riddle, and his teacher laughs the first time, not the 4th. We all pretend we don't hear music when there isn't any. Nora cooks too much food and gives half away. She thanks me by not forgiving me. As for Merritt O'Neill, she left a stack of drawings on her porch one night, edges cut clean, figures removed. On the back of one was a sentence written in a shaky but determined hand. I won't ask him again. The mailbox at 19 is gone. The number remains on a crooked stake, facing a road that has decided to forget it. When I drive past, I count to 4 and stop myself at 3. I keep a coin in my pocket tied with twine, and I do not unknot it. Some nights, when wind moves through the cottonwoods and makes a hushing sound shaped like advice, I put my hand on the wall and feel the studs like ribs and tell my house to stay. I say it softly, the way the tall figure taught me to say the only word he knows or cares about. SHH. Listen. Count. Stop.